Leo Carlisle had never been the kind of man to stop for strangers. His world was built on control, precision, and calculated risks. But the moment he stepped out of his office and saw two identical boys sitting on the cold stone steps, something inside him shifted. They were too young to be alone, too still, their bright blue eyes scanning the crowd like they were waiting for someone. When one of them looked up and locked eyes with him, Leo felt an unfamiliar pull in his chest. He didn't know these kids. But something told him they knew him. Leo Carlisle had spent years believing that every part of his life was under control. His world was built on precision, calculated risks, and absolute certainty. He had no time for chaos, no patience for unpredictability. That was how he had built his empire, how he had climbed from nothing to becoming one of the most powerful CEOs in the country. But standing outside his office that evening, staring at the two boys sitting on the steps of his building, he felt something unfamiliar: hesitation. The city buzzed around him, people moving in hurried steps as they rushed to their destinations. But the boys didn't move. They sat close to each other, their shoulders touching, identical in every way. Their blonde hair was slightly disheveled, their white t-shirts a little dirty, and their bright blue eyes, so strikingly familiar, watched the people passing by as if they were waiting for someone. Leo wasn't sure why he stopped. Maybe it was the way they looked so out of place, so small compared to the towering buildings around them. Or maybe it was something deeper, something unexplainable. He had spent his entire life ignoring things that didn't concern him. But this felt different. He stepped toward them, his shadow falling over their small frames. The boys looked up at the same time, their expressions wary but not afraid. "Do you need help?" His voice was firm but not unkind. The boys exchanged glances. It was a silent conversation, one Leo recognized from years of working with people who didn't trust easily. Finally, the one on the left, slightly taller, with a more confident posture, spoke first. "We don't know where our mom is." Leo felt something cold settle in his stomach. He crouched slightly, lowering himself to their level. "What do you mean?" The boy on the right bit his lip, glancing at his brother before speaking. "She left 2 days ago. She didn't come back." Leo frowned. "Where do you live?" "With her," the taller boy answered. "But we don't know where she is," the younger one added. There was something about the way they spoke, something too calm for two children who had been left alone for days. "What are your names?" Leo asked. "I'm Elijah," the older one said. "This is my brother, Lucas." Leo studied them carefully. They were identical. The same bright blue eyes, the same sharp features. The same shade of blonde hair. He had seen those features before. In the mirror. His chest tightened. "How old are you?" His voice was quieter now. 8, Lucas answered. Leo felt the ground shift beneath him. 8 years. The exact number of years since Olivia Morgan had walked out of his life. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. He had moved on. He had told himself that what happened with Liv was in the past. But now, looking at these two boys, he knew that the past had never really left him. He forced himself to stay composed. "Do you have anyone else? Family? Someone who can take care of you?" Elijah shook his head. "Just Mom." Lucas hesitated, then added softly, "She always said we only have her." Leo clenched his jaw. He had spent his life making quick decisions, assessing risks in seconds. But this wasn't a business deal. These were children. And if his gut was right, they were his children. He wasn't sure what to do next, but one thing was clear. He wasn't walking away. Leo Carlisle had always been a man of logic. He built his empire by analyzing every situation, making swift but calculated decisions, and never allowing emotions to cloud his judgment. But as he sat across from Elijah and Lucas in a quiet corner of a cafe, watching them eat like they hadn't had a proper meal in days. Logic had no place in his mind. There were too many questions and not enough answers. The boys had barely spoken since they sat down. They focused on their food, eating quickly but politely, glancing up at him every so often as if to make sure he was still there. He had never been around children before, much less twin boys who might be his own. He had no idea what to say to them. He watched them for a few more moments before finally breaking the silence. "When was the last time you saw your mom?" Elijah swallowed a bite of his sandwich before answering. 2 days ago. She left in the morning, said she was going to work. Leo leaned forward slightly. Did she say anything before she left? Did she seem upset? Lucas hesitated, then shook his head. She was normal. She kissed us and said she'd see us at dinner. Leo's grip tightened around the cup of coffee he had barely touched. He had spent years assuming Olivia had moved on, that she had built a life without him. But if things were normal, if she had just vanished without a trace, something was very wrong. "Where do you live?" he asked, keeping his voice even. Elijah and Lucas exchanged glances again before Elijah spoke. "A few blocks from here, in an apartment." "Do you have a key?" Lucas reached into the pocket of his shorts and pulled out a single silver key. Leo took a slow breath. "I'm going to take you home. We'll check if your mom left anything behind that could tell us where she is." The boys didn't respond immediately. Elijah looked skeptical, and Lucas fidgeted with his napkin. "Are you a cop?" Elijah asked finally. Leo shook his head. "No." Lucas tilted his head. "Then why do you care?" Leo studied them. He could see the intelligence in their eyes, the way they were trying to figure him out. They weren't scared, but they weren't sure if they could trust him either. "Because I think your mom might be in trouble," he said carefully. "And because I might be able to help." Elijah narrowed his eyes slightly. "Why would you help us?" Leo hesitated, then leaned back, choosing his words carefully. "Because I knew your mother a long time ago. And I don't believe she would ever just leave you." Lucas's expression changed first. A flicker of recognition, like something had clicked into place. "You knew Mommy?" Leo nodded. "Yes. A long time ago." Elijah sat up straighter. "Then why don't we know you?" Leo felt the question like a punch to the chest. He could have lied, could have told them he and Olivia lost touch, but something told him they wouldn't accept an easy answer. "Because she never told me about you," he admitted. Elijah stared at him for a long time. Lucas's fingers tightened around his cup. "Are you our dad?" Lucas asked softly. Leo had never been a man who hesitated. But for the first time in his life, he didn't know how to answer. Leo had faced high-stakes negotiations with some of the most ruthless businesspeople in the world. He had walked into boardrooms knowing millions were at risk, had made decisions that impacted thousands of lives, and had done it all without breaking a sweat. But sitting in a quiet cafe, staring at 2 8-year-old boys waiting for his answer, he had never felt more out of his depth. Lucas's question hung in the air between them, delicate yet heavy. "Are you our dad?" The logical part of Leo wanted to tell them he wasn't sure, that he needed proof before making such a claim. But logic didn't matter in this moment. All that mattered were the 2 sets of blue eyes locked on his, waiting for the truth. He exhaled slowly. "I don't know." Elijah frowned. "What do you mean, you don't know?" Leo leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "I knew your mom a long time ago. We were together for a while. But then she left, and I never heard from her again. She never told me she had kids." Lucas glanced at his brother, something unspoken passing between them. "Mom never talked about our dad," he admitted. "She always said it was just the 3 of us." Leo's jaw tightened. "Did she ever mention my name?" Elijah shook his head. "No. Leo felt something sharp twist inside his chest. Olivia had deliberately erased him from their lives. She hadn't just left, she had made sure he never knew they existed. He wanted to be angry, but more than that, he wanted to understand why. "We need to go to your apartment," he said finally. "If she left anything behind, papers, notes, anything, it might tell us where she is." The boys hesitated. Elijah still looked wary, but Lucas studied Leo carefully, his fingers gripping the edge of the table. "Are you gonna leave us after?" Leo looked at them, at the way they clung to each other, at the way their eyes held a mix of hope and fear. He couldn't promise them something he wasn't ready for. But he could promise them one thing. "I'm not leaving until I find your mom," he said. Elijah seemed to accept that answer. Lucas nodded. "Okay." Leo paid for their food, and they left the cafe, walking toward their apartment in silence. The city bustled around them, cars honking, people rushing past, but all Leo could focus on was the two small figures beside him. He had spent his entire life alone, convinced that was the only way he wanted to live. But now, with Elijah and Lucas walking next to him, he realized that maybe he had never really known what he was missing. When they reached the apartment building, it was exactly what he had expected, run down, the kind of place where single mothers worked 2 jobs just to keep a roof over their kids' heads. His stomach twisted as he followed them up the stairs. Olivia had lived like this, raised their children in this, while he had been in his penthouse, oblivious to the fact that they existed. Elijah unlocked the door, and they stepped inside. The apartment was small but neat. Toys were tucked away in the corner, dishes stacked in the sink, a blanket folded over the couch. It wasn't much, but it was a home. Lucas walked over to the counter and picked up a piece of paper. This was on the table when she left. Leo took it, scanning the familiar handwriting. "Running late. Be home for dinner. Love you both, ***. Nothing unusual. No sign of distress. But she had never come home." Leo turned to Elijah. "Where's her room?" The boy hesitated before pointing to a door down the hall. Leo stepped inside and immediately felt the air shift. The room was small, just a bed, a dresser, and a tiny closet. But there was something intimate about it, something that made it clear that someone had lived here, loved here, struggled here. He moved toward the dresser, his fingers brushing over a framed photo. It was old, slightly worn, but when he picked it up, his breath caught. It was a picture of Olivia. And him. Taken almost a decade ago, back when they were young, back when he had believed she was his future. She had kept this. His throat tightened as he set the frame down. He turned to the closet, pushing aside clothes until his fingers brushed against a box tucked in the back corner. He pulled it out, setting it on the bed. When he lifted the lid, he felt everything inside him still. There were letters. Dozens of them. All addressed to him. His hands trembled slightly as he picked one up, unfolding the paper. "Leo. I don't know if I'll ever send this. I don't know if you'd even care. But there's something I need to say." The words blurred slightly as he forced himself to read on. "I wasn't supposed to get pregnant. We were too young, and your world was too big for someone like me. I told myself I'd tell you, but then I was afraid. Afraid you'd feel trapped, afraid you'd think I was trying to ruin your future. So I left. I told myself I was doing the right thing. But every time I look at them, I wonder if I made the worst mistake of my life." Leo let the paper slip from his fingers. She had wanted to tell him. But she never had. His entire life had been built around certainty, around control. But in this moment, standing in the small apartment where Olivia had raised his sons alone, he realized that everything he thought he knew about his past had been a lie. He turned back to the boys, who stood in the doorway watching him. Lucas shifted nervously. "Did you find something?" Leo looked at them, at the only truth that mattered now. Yes, he said, his voice steady. And I think I know where to start. Leo sat on the edge of Olivia's bed, gripping the letter in his hands as if it might slip away. His mind was racing, filled with questions, regrets, and a frustration so deep he could barely breathe. She had wanted to tell him. She had written the words, admitted the truth on paper, but she had never followed through. Instead, she had left, taking his sons with her, raising them in a life that was separate from his. He had spent years thinking she had moved on, that she had forgotten about him, when in reality, she had been carrying this secret all along. He exhaled, forcing himself to push aside his emotions. He needed to focus. Olivia was missing, and whatever had happened to her, he was going to find out. Elijah and Lucas were still standing in the doorway, their small frames tense, their blue eyes flickering between him and the box of letters. They didn't say anything, but he could feel their curiosity, their need for answers. He wasn't sure how much to tell them. They were too young to understand the full weight of what had been kept from him, from them. But they deserved something. He took a steady breath and met their gaze. "Your mom wrote these letters to me." Lucas frowned. "She did?" Elijah crossed his arms. "Then why didn't you ever come?" The question hit Leo like a slap. He could see the hint of accusation in Elijah's face, the underlying thought that maybe Leo had known about them all along and just hadn't cared. It was a look he couldn't stand. "I never got them," Leo said firmly. "She never sent them." Lucas hesitated. "Why not?" Leo shook his head. "I don't know. But I intend to find out." He turned his attention back to the box, sifting through the letters, looking for something that could tell him more. Most of them were old, their edges slightly worn, written over the years. But at the very bottom of the box, there was an envelope that looked newer. It was sealed. His name was scrawled across the front in Olivia's handwriting. His fingers tightened around the paper. He glanced up at the boys. "I need a moment." Elijah seemed reluctant but nodded, taking Lucas by the arm and leading him back to the living room. Once they were gone, Leo carefully tore open the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. "Leo. If you're reading this, then something has happened. And I don't know if you'll be the one to find it, but I need you to know the truth. I always planned to tell you. I just never knew how. By the time I built up the courage, too much time had passed. I was scared of what you would think of me, of what you would say. But the boys deserve to know their father. And you deserve to know them. If I don't come home, please take care of them. Keep them safe. I don't know if I have enemies, but if I do, I think they've found me." Leo's blood turned to ice. His grip on the letter tightened as his heart pounded against his ribs. "I think they've found me." He reread the words, his mind racing. Olivia had been afraid. She had thought someone was after her. And now, she was gone. He pushed to his feet and strode back into the living room, his entire body wired with urgency. The boys looked up at him instantly, sensing the shift in his energy. Elijah sat up straighter. "What is it?" Leo hesitated. He couldn't tell them everything. Not yet. But he could tell them the one thing they needed to hear. "I'm going to find your mom," he said. Lucas blinked. "You promise?" Leo knelt in front of them, his blue eyes locking onto theirs. "I promise." He wasn't sure how yet. But he knew one thing for certain, whatever had happened to Olivia, whatever she had been afraid of, he would uncover the truth. And if someone had taken her, they were going to regret ever crossing him. Leo didn't waste any time. The moment he left the apartment, he was on the phone with his private investigator, James Nolan. If there was anyone who could uncover the truth, it was him. James had been working with Leo for years, handling everything from corporate espionage cases to high-profile security threats. But this wasn't business. This was personal. I need everything you can find on Olivia Morgan, Leo said as soon as James picked up. Her whereabouts, her connections, and if anyone had a reason to go after her. James didn't hesitate. Understood. When was the last time she was seen? 2 days ago. She left her apartment for work and never came back. The boys were left alone. There was a pause on the other end. She has kids. Leo clenched his jaw. Yes. And they might be mine. James exhaled sharply. I'll call you back in an hour. Leo hung up and ran a hand through his hair. The weight of everything was beginning to settle on his shoulders. He had never imagined himself as a father, but now the reality of it was unavoidable. Those boys were his. He didn't need a DNA test to confirm it. He had seen it in their faces, in their eyes. And now, the woman who had kept them from him was missing, possibly in danger. He drove back to his penthouse, knowing he needed to prepare for what was coming. He had built a reputation for being ruthless, for never backing down when something belonged to him. Olivia and those boys were his, whether she had told him or not. When he walked through the doors, Elijah and Lucas were sitting on the couch, flipping through channels on the massive television. They looked small against the backdrop of his sleek, modern home. It was a far cry from the tiny apartment they had been living in, and for the first time, he realized how different their worlds had been. Lucas looked up first. Did you find anything? Leo shook his head. Not yet. But I will. Elijah studied him carefully. What if she doesn't come back? Leo had no answer to that. He had spent his entire life fixing problems, making sure things went his way. But this was something he couldn't control. She will, he said finally. Lucas curled his knees up to his chest. Mom said people don't always come back. Leo felt something sharp twist in his chest. He crouched in front of them, looking between their identical faces. I swear to you, I will bring her home. The boys didn't say anything, but something in their posture relaxed. They wanted to believe him. His phone buzzed. James. Leo stepped away to take the call. Tell me you have something. I do, James said. And you're not going to like it. Leo's grip on the phone tightened. Go on. She wasn't working the night she disappeared. She left her apartment, but she never made it to her job. Security footage from a street camera shows her getting into a black SUV about 3 blocks away. It wasn't a cab, and she wasn't forced in, but she looked uneasy. Leo's pulse pounded. Who owns the SUV? I'm working on that, James said. But there's something else. Olivia has been making calls to a number registered under a company that doesn't exist. A front for something. Leo's mind raced. You think she was in trouble? James sighed. I think she knew she was in trouble. Leo's stomach tightened. Olivia had known something was coming. That's why she had written the letter. She hadn't just left, someone had taken her. And whoever they were, they had made the biggest mistake of their lives. Leo didn't waste time. The moment he hung up, he called James back. He needed details, addresses, names, anything that could lead him to Olivia. James was already ahead of him. I traced the SUV's plates, James said. The car belongs to a shell company. No real records, no listed employees. But I dug deeper. The registration was linked to a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Leo's jaw tightened. Do you have an exact location? James hesitated. I do. But Leo, if this is what I think it is, you need to be careful. This isn't a business deal you can negotiate your way out of. These people don't play by the same rules. Leo's voice was cold. Neither do I. He ended the call and grabbed his keys. He knew he should have called the police, but they would only slow him down. Olivia had been missing for 2 days. If she was still alive, he wasn't going to risk losing time. As he walked toward the door, he heard small footsteps behind him. "Where are you going?" Elijah's voice was quiet, but there was an edge of suspicion to it. Lucas stood slightly behind him, his blue eyes filled with something Leo couldn't quite place. Leo exhaled. He wasn't used to explaining himself to anyone. But these boys weren't just anyone. "I think I know where your mom is," he said. Lucas shifted nervously. "You're going to get her?" Leo nodded. Elijah studied him. "What if something happens to you?" Leo crouched slightly, leveling his gaze with theirs. "Nothing is going to happen to me." Elijah frowned. "You don't know that." Leo saw it then, the fear neither of them wanted to admit. They had already lost their mother. They were afraid they were about to lose him too. He hadn't been in their lives long, but they were still looking at him like he was something solid, something they didn't want to let go of. "I promise you," Leo said, his voice steady. "I will bring her home." Lucas hesitated before reaching forward and gripping the sleeve of Leo's jacket. It was a small touch, but it felt like something more. Elijah looked down. "You better keep that promise." Leo placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I will." Then he turned and walked out the door. The drive to the warehouse was silent. Leo's mind was a storm of thoughts, all of them leading back to Olivia. He had spent so many years convincing himself that she was just a part of his past. But now, as he tightened his grip on the steering wheel, he realized she had never really left his mind. When he pulled up outside the warehouse, it was dark. The building was old, metal siding rusted in places, a chain-link fence surrounding the perimeter. A single black SUV was parked outside, the same one from the footage. Leo got out of the car and moved quickly, staying in the shadows. He wasn't reckless. He had handled dangerous situations before, but this was different. He wasn't just protecting himself. He was fighting for Olivia. He reached the side of the building, pressing himself against the cold metal. Voices echoed from inside. He listened, straining to hear. "She wasn't supposed to be a problem," one voice said. "She started asking questions," another replied. Leo's blood ran cold. He moved carefully along the side of the building, peering through a dirty window. Inside, 3 men stood near a desk, while Olivia sat in a chair, her hands tied behind her back. She looked unharmed, but there was a bruise on her cheek. Something sharp and primal twisted inside Leo. He didn't think. He acted. Within seconds, he was inside. He moved fast, taking the first man down before the others even realized what was happening. The second lunged at him, but Leo dodged, driving his fist into the man's gut before knocking him to the ground. The third reached for a gun, but Leo was faster. He grabbed the weapon and turned it on the man. "Untie her," Leo ordered, his voice deadly. The man hesitated, his eyes darting between Leo and his fallen partners. "Now." The man moved quickly, fumbling with the ropes around Olivia's wrists. The moment she was free, she stumbled forward, but Leo caught her before she could fall. She looked up at him, her brown eyes wide with disbelief. "Leo." His hands tightened on her arms, grounding her. "I've got you." Her breath hitched, and for the first time in years, she let herself believe it. Leo tightened his grip on Olivia as she steadied herself. She felt too light in his arms, her body weak from exhaustion. But she was alive. That was all that mattered. He forced himself to stay focused, his grip on the gun still firm as he turned his attention back to the man who had untied her. "You're going to tell me why you took her," Leo said, his voice controlled but sharp. The man hesitated, his eyes darting toward his fallen partners before meeting Leo's gaze. "It wasn't personal." Leo's jaw clenched. "Wrong answer." Olivia placed a hand on his arm. "Leo," she murmured, her voice strained. He looked at her, the tension in his muscles not fading. Are you hurt? She shook her head. I'm okay. He exhaled slowly before turning back to the man. Start talking. The man swallowed hard. She was asking questions. She got too close. Leo's eyes narrowed. Too close to what? The man hesitated. Olivia's fingers dug into Leo's sleeve. It's about my job, she said. I thought something was off. The numbers weren't adding up. When I started looking deeper, I realized some of the money was being funneled into accounts that didn't exist. I reported it, but then someone started following me. A few days later, they grabbed me. Leo's grip on the gun didn't loosen. Who do you work for? Olivia hesitated before saying the name of a company he recognized. It was a smaller firm, nothing that had ever seemed significant to him. But now, knowing what they had done, knowing they had taken her, he was going to make sure every single person involved paid for it. He turned his attention back to the man. Who ordered it? The man hesitated again. Leo pressed the barrel of the gun against his temple. I don't have time for this. The man's breath hitched. It was just supposed to scare her. Olivia scoffed. Kidnapping me and tying me to a chair doesn't seem like just scaring me. Leo didn't take his eyes off the man. Who gave the order? The man hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. Leo's patience snapped. He drove his fist into the man's gut, making him double over. Say the name. The man gasped for air before finally speaking. Nathan Cole. Leo knew the name. A mid-level executive at the company. Not important enough to be making these kinds of moves unless someone higher up was backing him. But it was a start. Leo looked at Olivia. We need to go. She nodded, exhaustion in her eyes. What about them? Leo looked at the two unconscious men on the ground and the one still gasping for breath. They won't be a problem. He took Olivia's hand and led her toward the exit. Her steps were unsteady, but she kept up. When they reached his car, he helped her inside before getting in and speeding away from the warehouse. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. The weight of everything that had happened settled between them, thick and heavy. Olivia was the first to break the silence. How did you find me? Leo kept his eyes on the road. Your sons. She sucked in a breath. They're okay. They're fine. She exhaled in relief. I was so scared for them. Leo tightened his grip on the wheel. They were scared for you. Olivia looked down at her hands. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Leo glanced at her. Then why didn't you tell me about them? She flinched. Leo. Don't lie to me. His voice was firm but not harsh. I need to know why you kept them from me. She swallowed hard. I thought I was doing the right thing. Leo clenched his jaw. By taking my sons away. Tears welled in her eyes. I was afraid. Afraid that if I told you, you would feel obligated to stay. But not because you wanted to. Leo's chest tightened. That wasn't your choice to make. I know. Her voice cracked. And I regretted it every day. Silence stretched between them. Leo exhaled, forcing himself to push aside his frustration. They asked me if I was their dad. Olivia wiped at her eyes. What did you say? The truth. That I didn't know. She looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. But you do now, don't you? Leo's hands tightened on the wheel. I knew the second I saw them. Her breath hitched. I'm sorry. He glanced at her, his voice steady. I don't care about the past right now. I just need to get you home. She let out a shaky breath and nodded. Okay. Leo pressed the gas pedal harder, his focus set on one thing, getting her back to the two boys who had been waiting for her. Leo drove through the city streets with one singular focus: getting Olivia home. The air in the car was thick with unspoken words, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on both of them. Olivia sat quietly in the passenger seat, her hands clenched together in her lap, her breathing still uneven from the fear that hadn't yet left her. He could see her exhaustion, the way her body trembled slightly despite the warmth of the car. She had been strong for so long, but now, finally safe, the weight of everything was settling in. He pulled up to his penthouse and cut the engine. Olivia turned to him, hesitation flickering across her face. He knew what she was thinking. She had left him years ago, had taken their children and built a life without him. And now, she was stepping into his world again, not as the woman he had once loved but as someone who had been forced to face the truth she had tried to run from. She took a breath and reached for the door handle, but before she could open it, Leo placed a hand over hers. She froze, her brown eyes lifting to meet his. There was no accusation in his gaze, no anger. Just quiet intensity. "They've been waiting for you," he said. She swallowed hard and nodded. He stepped out and walked around the car, opening the door for her. She hesitated only a second before taking his offered hand. She was unsteady on her feet, but he didn't let go. He guided her inside, his grip firm, reassuring. The moment they stepped into the penthouse, two small figures came racing toward them. "Mom!" Olivia barely had time to react before both boys threw themselves at her. She dropped to her knees, pulling them against her, her arms wrapping tightly around their small bodies as sobs broke from her throat. Elijah clung to her like he was afraid she would disappear again. Lucas buried his face in her shoulder, his small frame shaking. "I'm here," she whispered between sobs. "I'm here, my loves." Leo stood back, watching the reunion unfold. He had prepared himself for this moment, had told himself that it was all that mattered, that the boys had their mother back. But as he watched them, something in his chest tightened. It wasn't just about them. It was about all of them. Olivia lifted her tear-streaked face, her gaze locking onto Leo's. Her eyes were filled with something he couldn't quite define. Gratitude. Regret. Something deeper. Lucas turned first, looking up at Leo. His small voice broke the silence. "You found her." Leo crouched down beside them. "I promised I would." Elijah shifted slightly, his blue eyes studying Leo carefully. "You didn't have to help us." Leo met his gaze head-on. "Yes, I did." The boy frowned slightly. "Why?" Leo didn't hesitate. "Because you're mine." The word settled between them, heavy and undeniable. Lucas looked at his mother. "Is it true?" Olivia wiped at her eyes and nodded. "Yes." Elijah's fingers curled into the fabric of her sweater. "Does that mean he's staying?" Leo looked at Olivia, waiting for her answer. This wasn't just his choice to make. Olivia exhaled shakily. "If he wants to." Leo's jaw tightened. "I'm not going anywhere." Lucas let out a breath of relief. "Good." Elijah hesitated for a long moment, then slowly reached forward, gripping the sleeve of Leo's jacket just like he had before he left to find Olivia. It was small, barely noticeable, but Leo understood the meaning behind it. It was trust. Olivia ran a hand through her son's hair, looking at Leo with something close to awe. "I never thought I'd get this moment," she admitted softly. Leo held her gaze. "Neither did I." The night stretched on, the weight of the past slowly giving way to something new, something fragile but real. The boys fell asleep curled up beside their mother, their breathing soft and even. Olivia watched them, her fingers gently running through their hair. She looked tired, but there was peace in her expression that hadn't been there before. Leo sat beside her, watching them with her. "I don't know how to fix everything," she whispered. Leo was quiet for a moment before he spoke. We don't have to fix the past. We just have to make sure we don't make the same mistakes again. She turned to him, her lips trembling slightly. And if I don't know how? He reached over, covering her hand with his. Then we figure it out together. She exhaled, the last of her defenses crumbling. And for the first time in 8 years, Olivia Morgan finally let herself believe that she wasn't alone. The ending of this story is not just about closure, it's about redemption, healing, and the power of second chances. Leo starts as a man who believes he has control over every aspect of his life, but by the end, he realizes that some things, family, love, and fate, cannot be controlled, only embraced. What makes this conclusion truly impactful is that it doesn't rely on dramatic confessions or grand gestures. Instead, it is built on quiet, deeply personal moments, Olivia finally allowing herself to trust Leo, the boys reaching for him in silent acceptance, and Leo choosing to stay not out of obligation, but out of love. One of the most powerful aspects of this ending is that no one is perfect. Olivia made mistakes by keeping the truth from Leo. Leo made mistakes by believing he had moved on when, in reality, he had been missing something all along. And the boys, despite their resilience, had been waiting their entire lives for someone to fight for them. The final scene doesn't tie everything up neatly, but it does give them something more important: hope. The true victory in this story is not just that Leo found Olivia, but that he found himself in the process. He stepped into the role of a father not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He didn't force his way into their lives, he earned his place. And in the end, the family that had been fractured for so long was finally whole again. It's a reminder that sometimes, love isn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes, it's about simply showing up, choosing to stay, and proving, day by day, that the past doesn't have to define the future. 100 miles on the road, thousands of thoughts, and one moment that changed everything. Jason arrived at the hospital, confident he was about to become a father. But when he saw the baby girl, he froze. White skin, blonde hair, blue eyes. His heart stopped, and only one question echoed in his mind: how is this possible? Everything he knew, everything he believed in, crumbled in an instant. Who do you think is to blame in this situation? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to stay updated on new stories. There's so much more to come. Jason gripped the steering wheel tightly as his car sped down the empty highway. The road stretched endlessly before him, bathed in the pale glow of the early morning sun. Every mile marker he passed felt like a heartbeat, each one bringing him closer to the moment he had dreamed about for months. His mind raced faster than his car, filled with visions of holding his baby girl for the first time. He imagined her tiny hands wrapping around his finger, her soft cries, and the warmth of her small body nestled against his chest. She would have his broad nose, his deep brown eyes, and his curly hair. A perfect blend of him and the woman he had loved for the past 3 years. The journey was more than just a drive, it was a pilgrimage of hope and responsibility. He replayed the moment he learned about the pregnancy, the way her voice trembled as she told him. He remembered how his heart swelled with pride, knowing he would finally have the family he had always longed for. But there were shadows in his thoughts too, faint doubts he refused to entertain. Her recent behavior, distant, secretive, lingered at the edges of his mind. He shook his head, as if to cast the thoughts out onto the asphalt rushing beneath him. This wasn't the time for suspicion. This was a day for celebration. As the scenery blurred past, fields, gas stations, small towns, Jason thought about the life he wanted to give his daughter. He would teach her kindness, strength, and resilience. He would protect her from the hardships he had faced, shielding her from the prejudice and pain he knew all too well. The car's radio played softly in the background, but Jason barely noticed. His thoughts were louder, a mix of nervous excitement and growing anxiety. His foot pressed the gas pedal harder as if speeding could calm his racing mind. A sign for the city hospital appeared in the distance. Jason's chest tightened with anticipation. The words, 100 miles to go, flashed briefly on his GPS, and for the first time during the drive, he smiled. His journey wasn't just about distance, it was about stepping into a new life. Little did he know, this road would take him somewhere far more complicated than he could have imagined. The fluorescent lights of the hospital hallway seemed brighter than Jason had expected, casting an almost sterile glow over the bustling nurses and quiet murmur of conversations. His palms were slick with sweat as he clutched the bouquet of flowers he had picked up along the way, soft pink roses, the kind he imagined a little girl might one day call her favorite. Every step he took toward the maternity ward felt heavier than the last, weighted with anticipation and something else he couldn't quite name. Outside the delivery room, a nurse greeted him with a polite smile and motioned for him to wait. Jason's heart thumped loudly in his chest, a drumbeat of nervous excitement. Then he heard it, a baby's cry, soft at first but growing stronger, cutting through the hum of the hospital. It was a sound Jason thought he'd never forget, one that seemed to reach into his soul and ignite a fire of pride and love. Moments later, the door swung open, and another nurse emerged, holding a swaddled bundle in her arms. Jason's breath caught in his throat as she walked toward him. This was it. This was the moment he had waited for, driven miles for, imagined countless times in his mind. The nurse carefully placed the baby in his arms, and Jason looked down, ready to see the reflection of himself in his child's features. But instead, his heart stopped. The baby girl had alabaster skin, impossibly pale against the pastel pink blanket. Her hair was a golden blonde, soft and wispy, and when her tiny eyes opened for the briefest moment, they revealed a piercing blue, nothing like Jason's deep brown eyes. Time seemed to freeze as Jason's mind struggled to process what he was seeing. His hands trembled slightly as he held the baby closer, searching her face for any trace of himself, any hint of familiarity. But there was nothing. A wave of confusion crashed over him, quickly followed by a cold, creeping sense of dread. His throat tightened, and he forced himself to glance at the nurse, who was already looking away, her expression carefully neutral. "Congratulations," she said softly, though the words sounded hollow. Jason's gaze shifted to the door of the delivery room. His girlfriend, now the mother of this child, was being wheeled out in a hospital bed, her face pale and exhausted. When their eyes met, her expression faltered, an almost imperceptible flicker of guilt flashed across her features before she quickly looked away. The room seemed to close in on Jason, the sterile walls pressing against him as his expectations crumbled. His chest tightened, not from joy, but from the weight of betrayal. The baby in his arms began to fuss, her tiny cries piercing through his spiraling thoughts. "How?" The word barely escaped his lips, a whisper filled with disbelief and a growing storm of emotions. But no one answered. The truth hung in the air, unspoken but undeniable, as Jason realized his world would never be the same again. Jason stood frozen, still holding the baby as if she might transform into someone else if he just waited long enough. The soft weight of her in his arms felt surreal, like a dream he couldn't wake from. The nurse quietly excused herself, leaving him standing alone in the hallway as the woman he loved was wheeled toward him, her eyes fixed on the ceiling to avoid his gaze. "Jason," she murmured weakly, her voice barely audible above the distant hum of hospital machines. He handed the baby back to the nurse with a shaky breath and crouched down beside the hospital bed. The tension between them was thick, an unspoken confrontation simmering just beneath the surface. "Talk to me," he said, his voice a mixture of urgency and desperation. "What's going on? Tell me this isn't what it looks like." Her lips parted, but no words came out. She glanced away, her fingers fumbling with the edge of the hospital blanket as if it might shield her from the storm brewing in his eyes. "Look at me." Jason snapped, his voice cracking with emotion. His hands gripped the side of the bed so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Explain this, now." Tears began to pool in her eyes, and she finally turned her head to face him. There was no defiance, no denial, just the raw weight of guilt that hung heavy in her expression. "I didn't know how to tell you," she whispered, her voice trembling. Jason's heart sank further, his stomach twisting into knots. "Tell me what?" he asked, though he already knew. He needed to hear her say it, needed the truth to come from her lips. "It's not you," she admitted, the words spilling out like poison. "The baby isn't yours." The world around him seemed to tilt, and for a moment, Jason felt as though he might collapse. He stared at her, hoping she would laugh and say it was some cruel joke, that the stress of childbirth had made her delirious. But her tears told a different story. "How could you do this?" His voice was low now, a dangerous calm masking the turmoil inside him. After everything we've been through, how could you lie to me like this?" Her tears spilled over, and she reached out to grab his hand, but he pulled away, stepping back as if her touch burned. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she sobbed. "I was scared, Jason. I didn't know how to tell you, I didn't want to lose you." Jason's laugh was bitter, sharp. "So you thought lying to me, letting me believe this was my child, was the better option? You thought I wouldn't notice?" She flinched at his words, her face crumpling under the weight of her shame. "I thought maybe you wouldn't care," she said softly. "Wouldn't care?" Jason repeated, his voice rising. "You thought I wouldn't care that you betrayed me, that you let me build my life around a lie?" Her sobs grew louder, but Jason couldn't find it in himself to comfort her. The pain in his chest was overwhelming, each breath feeling like it dragged shards of glass into his lungs. "Who is he?" Jason demanded, his voice icy now. "Who's the father?" She shook her head, refusing to answer, but her silence was an answer in itself. Jason stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the woman he had once thought he would spend his life with. Everything he had built in his mind, every plan, every dream, was unraveling, thread by thread, in this sterile hospital room. Finally, he stepped away, his jaw clenched as he tried to swallow the rage and sorrow threatening to consume him. "I drove 100 miles, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "For this. For a lie." Her sobs followed him as he turned and walked out of the room, leaving her alone with the weight of her choices. Jason walked down the brightly lit hospital hallway, his head bowed, his hands clenched into fists. The sting of betrayal throbbed like an open wound, raw and unrelenting. He wasn't sure where he was going, away from her, away from the baby, away from everything that had just unraveled before his eyes. But no matter how far he walked, he couldn't escape the whispers. The first one came from behind the nurse's station, low and sharp, but loud enough to pierce through his spiraling thoughts. "Did you see him? Poor guy, looks devastated." Jason's jaw tightened. He didn't look up. He couldn't. The knot in his throat was too tight, the weight on his chest too crushing. Another voice chimed in, softer but no less biting. "You think he didn't know? The baby's as white as snow." The words hit him like a slap. He stopped mid-step, his feet rooted to the linoleum floor. He didn't need to turn around to know they were talking about him. He could feel their eyes boring into his back, dissecting his pain as though it were a spectacle for their amusement. He took a shaky breath and kept moving, each step heavier than the last. As he rounded a corner, he passed a young couple sitting in the waiting area. The woman glanced at him, then leaned closer to her partner, whispering something Jason couldn't hear but could easily imagine. Her expression said it all, pity, mixed with just a hint of judgment. Jason's fists tightened until his nails dug into his palms. He felt like a spotlight was following him, illuminating his humiliation for everyone to see. At the elevator, an elderly man stepped aside to let him pass. His gaze lingered a moment too long, and when their eyes met, Jason saw it there too, the subtle shake of the head, the unspoken words, "How could you not know?" The doors slid shut, and Jason was finally alone. Or so he thought. As the elevator descended, his mind replayed the moments in the delivery room, the words of his girlfriend echoing like a broken record, "It's not, you." The elevator stopped on the first floor, and Jason stepped out, his head pounding. The lobby was crowded with visitors, families laughing or consoling each other, doctors moving briskly between them. But as Jason passed, the noise seemed to quiet. Heads turned. Conversations paused. He could feel the weight of their stares, each one a silent accusation, a judgment passed without trial. A group of young nurses standing near the reception desk exchanged glances. One of them, a tall woman with a clipboard, muttered under her breath, but Jason caught the words, "Figures." Probably wasn't around much anyway. His breath hitched. The anger that had been simmering beneath his grief threatened to boil over. He wanted to shout, to tell them they didn't know anything about him, about the sacrifices he had made, about the love he had poured into this relationship. But instead, he walked on, his shoulders hunched as if bracing against a storm. He reached the exit and pushed the door open, the cold December air hitting him like a slap. Outside, the world carried on as usual, cars honked, people hurried down the street, oblivious to the chaos unraveling inside him. Jason leaned against the wall, his breath visible in the icy air. He wanted to scream, to punch something, to cry. But all he could do was stand there, drowning in the silence of his own pain, while the cold stares of strangers lingered in his mind like ghosts he couldn't shake. Jason sat in the corner of the hospital's waiting room, the sterile smell of disinfectant and muted sounds of distant conversations pressing in on him. The envelope rested on his lap, its edges crisp and unyielding beneath his fingertips. It was heavier than it had any right to be, as if the truth inside carried its own unbearable weight. He hadn't opened it yet. He couldn't. The paternity test had been his demand, his desperate attempt to cling to some sliver of hope. A part of him still clung to the possibility, however small, that this had all been some terrible misunderstanding. Maybe there was a medical anomaly, or some bizarre recessive gene explanation that could make sense of everything. But deep down, he knew. He had known the moment he saw the baby's face. A nurse passed by, her gaze flickering toward him before quickly looking away. Jason shifted uncomfortably, feeling the familiar prickle of judgment crawling over his skin. It didn't matter that no one had said anything outright since that day, the looks, the whispers, they told him everything he needed to know. The envelope stared back at him like a challenge. His hands trembled slightly as he slid his thumb under the sealed flap, tearing it open with deliberate slowness. The paper inside was pristine, the black text stark against the white background. His eyes scanned the document, searching for the words that mattered most. Probability of paternity, 0%. The numbers hit him like a punch to the gut, stealing the air from his lungs. He read them again, as if repetition might somehow change their meaning. But the truth was undeniable, printed there in cold, clinical language. It wasn't his child. Jason leaned back in the chair, his head resting against the wall as he stared blankly at the ceiling. His vision blurred, though he wasn't sure if it was from exhaustion or the tears threatening to spill over. He thought about the months he had spent preparing for this moment, assembling a crib, buying tiny clothes, imagining bedtime stories and father-daughter dances. All of it felt like a cruel joke now, a life he had built on a foundation of lies. The door to the waiting room creaked open, and Jason's girlfriend stepped inside. She hesitated when she saw the envelope in his hands, her expression a mixture of guilt and fear. You opened it," she said softly, her voice barely audible. Jason didn't respond immediately. He lowered the paper onto his lap, his eyes meeting hers with a hollow stare. "Why did you let me believe it was mine?" His voice was low, steady, but edged with raw pain. "I thought," she paused, wringing her hands. "I thought maybe it wouldn't matter. You already loved her. You." "It matters," Jason interrupted, his tone sharp enough to cut through her words. "It matters because you lied. You didn't even give me a choice. Her eyes filled with tears, but Jason couldn't bring himself to care. The pain in his chest felt too heavy, too all-encompassing to leave room for anything else. "You stole this from me," he said, his voice breaking. "You stole my chance to be a father, to have a family built on trust, not deceit." She took a step closer, her hands outstretched as if to touch him, to bridge the growing chasm between them. "Jason, please. She still needs you. We still need you." He shook his head, standing abruptly. The paper fluttered to the floor, forgotten. "You don't need me," he said quietly, his voice laced with bitterness. "You just needed someone to clean up your mess." Jason walked out of the room, leaving her standing there amidst the sterile walls and unspoken words. The truth had been confirmed, but the clarity brought no comfort, only the unshakable weight of betrayal. The silence in Jason's apartment was suffocating. The kind that pressed against his chest and wrapped around his throat, making it hard to breathe. He sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, head in his hands, staring at the empty coffee table as if it held the answers to questions he didn't even know how to ask anymore. The crumpled results of the paternity test lay discarded on the floor, where he had thrown them hours earlier. The words, "probability of paternity, 0%, replayed in his mind like a broken record, each repetition stabbing deeper into the raw wound in his chest. He had come home because he needed space, but here, in the solitude of his apartment, the walls felt like they were closing in on him. Every object in the room seemed to mock him, the half-finished baby crib in the corner, the unopened box of diapers by the door, the framed photo of him and her smiling on their last vacation. Jason let out a shaky breath, leaning back against the couch as memories flooded in. He remembered the first time she told him she was pregnant, how her face lit up, how he felt his heart swell with pride and joy. He had wrapped his arms around her, promising to take care of her, of their child, of their future together. "Lies," he muttered under his breath, his voice rough and barely audible in the empty room. He thought about all the nights he had spent working late shifts, saving every penny for the baby. He remembered the weekends spent assembling furniture, painting the nursery, dreaming about the kind of father he would be. And for what? For a child that wasn't his? For a woman who had betrayed him in the most intimate way possible? Jason stood abruptly, pacing the room as his anger began to simmer beneath the surface. His footsteps echoed loudly in the quiet, each one punctuated by the thoughts racing through his mind. Why hadn't he seen it sooner? There were signs, there had to be. The late-night phone calls she dismissed as work, the sudden distance in her eyes, the way she avoided conversations about the future. He had ignored them all, blinded by love and the hope of building a family. But was it just love? Or was it something else, something deeper, more painful? The fear of losing her. The fear of being alone. Jason stopped by the window, staring out at the city below. The streetlights cast long shadows on the pavement, and the occasional car passed by, its headlights briefly illuminating the darkness. He felt as though he were watching the world move on without him, while he stood frozen in place, trapped in his own mind. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel the pain fully. Not just the betrayal, but the loss. He had lost the future he had envisioned, the daughter he had already begun to love, the life he had spent months building. It wasn't just the relationship that had been shattered, it was his sense of self, his identity as a soon-to-be father, his belief in the life he thought he was living. Tears blurred his vision, and he didn't bother wiping them away. They rolled down his cheeks, hot and unrelenting, as the weight of everything crashed down on him. The silence of solitude was deafening, but it was also revealing. In the stillness, Jason saw the truth he had been avoiding. He couldn't erase the love he had already felt for the baby. She was innocent, untouched by the lies that had brought her into his life. And yet, he wasn't sure if he could ever look at her without seeing the betrayal that came with her. Jason sank back onto the couch, exhausted. His anger had burned out, leaving behind only a hollow ache. He closed his eyes, letting the silence envelop him once more. For now, all he could do was sit with the pain, let it seep into every corner of his being, and hoped that someday, somehow, he would find a way to move forward. The next morning, Jason woke to the pale light of dawn filtering through the blinds. He hadn't slept much, his mind had refused to quiet down, replaying the events of the last few days over and over. The test results, the cold stares, her tearful confession. Each memory felt like a fresh wound, raw and unrelenting. But in the quiet of the morning, something else stirred within him. A question he hadn't allowed himself to ask until now: what about the baby? Her face came to him unbidden, the softness of her tiny cheeks, the delicate curl of her fingers, the way her little cries had tugged at something deep within him. Jason had only held her for a few moments, but in that brief time, he had felt something powerful. Something he couldn't ignore. He sat up, running a hand over his face. His thoughts drifted to the moment he first learned about the pregnancy. How excited he had been, how fiercely he had wanted to protect and provide for this child. Those feelings hadn't been tied to biology, they had come from his heart. Jason rose from the couch and walked to the window, staring out at the waking city. He thought about his own childhood, the absence of his father, the struggle to find someone who cared enough to stay. He had vowed long ago that if he ever had a child, he would be everything his father wasn't: present, dependable, loving. The baby wasn't his by blood, but did that really matter? She hadn't asked to be born into this mess. She hadn't chosen her parents or the circumstances of her arrival. She was innocent, just as he had been all those years ago when his own father walked away. Jason's chest tightened as he thought about the future. Would she grow up feeling unwanted, caught between lies and rejection? Could he live with himself if he walked away, knowing he had the chance to make a difference in her life? He didn't have all the answers. He didn't even know if he could forgive her mother for what she had done. But the baby, his baby, as his heart stubbornly insisted, deserved better. Jason turned away from the window, his decision crystallizing in his mind. Against all odds, despite the pain and betrayal, he knew what he had to do. He grabbed his jacket and keys, the weight on his shoulders lifting just slightly as he headed for the door. It wasn't going to be easy. The road ahead would be full of challenges, judgment, and unresolved emotions. But Jason had never been one to back down from a fight, especially not when it came to doing what was right. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: he wouldn't let this child grow up without knowing love. Blood didn't make a father. Choices did. And Jason was ready to make his. Jason stood in the doorway of her hospital room, his figure framed against the cold, fluorescent light spilling in from the hallway. She was sitting up in bed, her hair disheveled, her face pale. The baby lay asleep in the small bassinet beside her, a picture of innocence in a world that suddenly felt irreparably broken. She looked up when she heard him enter, her eyes wide with apprehension. "Jason," she whispered, her voice fragile. He stepped inside, letting the door swing shut behind him. The sound of it closing seemed to echo, a final punctuation mark on everything that had been left unsaid between them. Jason took a deep breath, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. He had spent hours thinking about this moment, rehearsing what he would say. But now that he was here, words seemed both too much and not enough. "I've made a decision," he began, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. She nodded slowly, her gaze darting to the baby and then back to him. I understand," she said, her hands gripping the blanket that covered her legs. "I know I messed up. I know I don't deserve." "Stop," Jason interrupted, his tone firmer than he intended. "This isn't about you anymore." Her mouth snapped shut, and for the first time, she truly looked at him. Not as the man she had betrayed, but as someone who had come to a resolution she couldn't undo. Jason took a step closer, his eyes locking with hers. "I'm staying in her life," he said, nodding toward the sleeping baby. "She didn't ask for any of this, and she deserves better than the mess we've made." A flicker of hope lit up her face. "Jason, that's wonderful. We can." No, his voice was sharp, cutting off her sentence before it could take root. There's no we anymore. Her expression crumbled, the hope fading as quickly as it had appeared. But, Jason, please. I can fix this. I can make it right. We can still. You can't fix this, he said, his voice quieter now but no less resolute. What you did broke something in me. Something that can't be put back together. You lied to me. You used me. And you didn't even give me the choice to decide what I could handle. Tears streamed down her face as she reached out to him. I was scared, she pleaded. I didn't want to lose you. You lost me the moment you chose to lie, Jason said, stepping back out of her reach. This isn't about fear. It's about respect. And you didn't respect me enough to tell me the truth. The silence that followed was deafening, filled only by the soft hum of the hospital machines. Jason's gaze softened as it drifted to the baby. She's the only reason I'm still here, he admitted. Because she deserves love, and I can give her that. But us? We're done. Her sobs filled the room, but Jason felt no satisfaction in her pain. Only a deep, aching sadness for what they had lost, for what had never truly been real. He turned toward the door, pausing only once to glance back at the baby. She stirred slightly in her sleep, her tiny hand twitching against the blanket. Jason's heart clenched, but his resolve held firm. Without another word, he walked out of the room, leaving behind the woman who had shattered his trust and the life they had once dreamed of building together. The ties were broken, but his path was clear. For the first time in days, he felt a sense of purpose. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something new. And for the baby, Jason would make sure it was something better. Jason sat in his dimly lit apartment, the soft glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across the room. On the table in front of him lay the papers he had picked up earlier that day, a formal acknowledgement of paternity, guardianship forms, and a checklist of resources for new parents. His signature stood stark on the dotted lines, marking a commitment that went far deeper than ink on paper. He ran a hand over his face, exhaling slowly as the weight of what he had chosen settled on his shoulders. This wasn't the life he had imagined. The betrayal still burned in his chest, raw and unyielding, but it wasn't about her anymore. It wasn't about the lies or the broken promises. It was about the child, the tiny, fragile life that had been thrust into his world. She wasn't his by blood, but in his heart, she had already claimed a place he couldn't deny. Jason knew what it was like to grow up without a father, to feel the absence of someone who should have been there. He wasn't going to let that happen to her, no matter how complicated the circumstances. The first test of his resolve came the following morning. He stood outside the hospital nursery, looking through the glass at the row of bassinets. His heart stuttered as his eyes found her, bundled in soft pink, her small fists curled against her cheeks. She was so tiny, so vulnerable. A nurse approached, smiling softly. Are you ready to hold her again? Jason hesitated, his palms suddenly slick with sweat. Was he ready? Could he do this? But then he nodded, his throat too tight to speak. She led him into the nursery and handed the baby to him with practiced ease. Jason cradled her awkwardly at first, terrified he might drop her, but as her warmth seeped into him, his grip softened. Her little face scrunched up, and her tiny hand brushed against his chest. Hey, little one, he whispered, his voice cracking. It's just you and me now. The room seemed to blur around them as he stared down at her. In that moment, all the doubts and fears melted away. This wasn't about biology or betrayal. This was about love, the kind that wasn't bound by blood or circumstance. Over the next few days, Jason threw himself into preparing for her arrival home. He cleaned the apartment from top to bottom, cleared out the spare room, and set up the crib he had once assembled with such joy. Every piece of furniture, every tiny onesie he folded, felt like a step toward rebuilding his life around her. His friends didn't understand. Some called him crazy for taking on this responsibility, for not walking away from a situation that had caused him so much pain. But Jason didn't care. He wasn't doing this for anyone else. He was doing it for her. The first night she came home was harder than he expected. Her cries echoed through the apartment, shrill and relentless, as he paced back and forth, trying everything he could think of to soothe her. He rocked her, sang to her, even called the nurse's hotline in a panic. By the time she finally fell asleep, Jason was exhausted. He sat on the edge of his bed, holding her close as she slept against his chest. Despite the chaos of the night, he felt an overwhelming sense of peace. "This is what it means," he murmured to himself, his fingers brushing over her tiny hand. "This is what it means to be a father." The days turned into weeks, and Jason learned more about himself than he ever thought possible. He discovered patience he didn't know he had, strength he didn't know he needed, and a capacity for love that went beyond anything he had ever imagined. Every sleepless night, every diaper change, every soft coo and fleeting smile reinforced his decision. She might not have been born from him, but she was his in every way that mattered. And Jason vowed to be the kind of father she could always rely on, no matter what. In the quiet moments, when she slept peacefully in his arms, Jason often thought about the path that had brought him here. It wasn't the life he had planned, but it was the life he had chosen. And in that choice, he found a purpose greater than anything he had ever known. The morning sunlight streamed through the curtains of Jason's apartment, casting a warm glow across the small but cozy living room. It was a quiet Sunday, the kind Jason never thought he'd learn to cherish. On the couch, nestled in his arms, was the baby girl who had, against all odds, become his entire world. She stirred slightly, her tiny hand gripping his finger as she let out a soft coo. Jason smiled, a feeling of peace washing over him that he hadn't known in months. The chaos, the betrayal, the sleepless nights, it all felt distant now, like a storm that had finally passed. The apartment bore the marks of his new life. The once pristine walls were now adorned with pastel-colored decals of animals. Toys were scattered on the floor, and a stack of neatly folded baby clothes sat on the dining table, waiting to be put away. It was messy, yes, but it was home. Jason had changed, too. The weight of betrayal still lingered somewhere deep inside him, but it no longer defined him. He had found something stronger within himself, a resilience he didn't know he possessed. And at the heart of it was her. He thought about the journey that had brought him here. Every painful moment, every decision he'd had to make, every judgmental stare he'd endured, it had all been worth it for this. For her. She had given his life a new direction, a new purpose. Jason gently laid her down in her crib and stood there for a moment, watching her tiny chest rise and fall with each breath. He whispered softly, "You're my family now. I'll never let you down." That promise wasn't just for her, it was for himself, too. It was a commitment to the life they were building together, a life free from the shadows of the past. He stepped into the kitchen and started preparing breakfast, the rhythmic sound of the knife against the cutting board filling the air. It was a simple routine, but it grounded him. He had learned to find joy in the small things, the quiet mornings, the milestones she reached, the moments they shared. Jason knew there would still be challenges ahead. Raising her alone wouldn't be easy, and the scars of what had happened wouldn't disappear overnight. But he was no longer afraid. He had faced the worst and come out stronger on the other side. As he sat down with his coffee, the baby monitor crackled to life with a soft whimper. He smiled, setting his mug aside and heading back to her crib. She reached out for him, her tiny fingers grasping the air, and he scooped her up without hesitation. "Let's get ready for a new day," he said softly, kissing her forehead. It wasn't the life he had envisioned, but it was the life he had chosen. And in her eyes, he saw a future filled with hope, love, and endless possibilities. What do you think about Jason's journey? Could you see yourself making the same choices he did? Let me know your thoughts, I'd love to hear them. If you enjoyed this story and want more heartfelt, thought-provoking tales, don't forget to subscribe. There's so much more to explore together.